it is recorded that there were also moves that were made by other leaders in neighboring countries that if Zimbabweans were to take their land, they should defer it for some time so that South Africa can be free. Because whatever was going to happen in Zimbabwe with respect to the land reform would send signals to the apartheid regime so that they can tighten their hold on South Africa. So one of the reasons why it took so time for Zimbabwe to go all out to take its land after the expiry of the 10 years and the reneging of the British government after signing an agreement at the land conference that took place in Victoria Falls in the 90s. It was because we wanted to see South Africa free. And freedom in South Africa came in 1994, and it took some time and negotiations and hoping that the British, which then came under Tony Blair, would see reason to fund for the repossession or the buying of land. Because of the failure by the British, it left the Zimbabweans with no other option other than to seize land, which they believed even during the war that it was land that had been taken from our forefathers and stolen forcibly. Death, some lost their lives, some lost their cattle or domestic animals when land was seized forcibly from them. And when the British government reneged under Tony Blair, the Soswe clan and the other members of ZANU-PF saw it fit that people should go onto the land and repossess, take what is theirs. And Comrade Robert Mugabe and the war veterans had no option but to make sure that people were given land under two models. We had the A1 model and the A2 model. One of the models would allow villagization so that people were given sizable land tracts where they could settle and farm. And the idea was decongest the villages where people were living in congested form. Then we had another model which would see those with the capacity to continue farming getting sizable pieces of land. And with this process, a number of people were able to get land. People have argued and said Robert Mugabe and his leadership collective could have used another model. The model that was used at that particular time had no precedence. It was one of its own and the first to be done in Africa and in the world. And the manner in which it was done, you are taking land from people who ordinarily are not prepared to give in their land. So there could be scuffles, there could be fighting, and these unfortunately led to the loss of lives of other people, which was not the whole purpose and agenda of the land reform process. Because at first it was the willing buyer, willing seller, which meant people should, if you are not prepared to sell, or if you are prepared to sell your land, you would be compensated for the improvements, not for the land, but for the improvements that you would have done on the land. And this is what Robert Mugabe did. A lot of people got their land. Unfortunately, because it was a fast-track land program, we could not train those that were going on the farm, and as a result, productivity from the farms declined, leading to the challenges that we saw in the early 2000s.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that I would like to ask you on the land issue because it is something that need to be understood. So yeah, like I said before, it's one of the factors that actually characterize the Mugabe administration. One thing I want to ask is, what is the meaning of willing buyer, willing seller? I'm not sure I fully understand that.
Willing buyer, willing seller. There should be a willing buyer, somebody, there should be a willing seller. The person who is occupying the land should be willing to sell it. Then the government will then buy it. And this was done so that the people who were occupying the land would make a decision to sell their land. We are looking at a situation where Mr. X would be having land from stretching more than 20 kilometers. We have one farmer in Mashonaland West who had large tracts of land stretching more than 50 kilometers. One out of good reason would say, because we would want to ensure that people are resettled, let me give part of my land. For that part of the land, you sell it, then it is bought by the government and you get your money. But there were not many people who were willing to sell their farms, even those that were idle. So the principle of willing buyer, willing seller was one which required the owner of the farm to cede part of his farm in return for compensation at the value of the piece of land or the farm that he will be giving up for sale to the government. And this land would then be used for resettlement by the government.
Sorry that I'm laughing, because it's quite annoying. It's like somebody have stolen your property, then at a point you say, okay, if you are willing to give me back what you have stolen from me, I will compensate you for having kept it up to this point. Okay, but where did the idea itself even come from? And how were the people sure that those who are now occupying the land, who are now the master of Africa, coming from Europe, they are the master of this world, they will just decide to give up the land so that the government can then buy it? I'm not yet clear on that.
Yes, the willing buyer, willing seller was part of the clauses that was put in the Lancaster House Conference agreement. You recall I said that one of the sticking points during the Lancaster House Conference was that of the land question, where Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo were saying that one of the things that we would want to see in an independent Zimbabwe is that land should be returned to its rightful owners. And on the other hand, we had Muzorewa, Muzorewa, who was the leader of the Zimbabwe Rhodesia administration, and Ian Smith. They pushed together for the preservation of the properties of the whites where they were staying at that time. But Robert Mugabe, you recall I said he had even walked out of the conference because he felt that it would be an injustice for those who would have lost their lives and those who would have lost their brothers, sisters, and children at the battlefront to then hear that people have ceded to an agreement which did not allow the black majority to own their land. But through persuasion by other political leaders and the leaders of other countries in the region, he went back, and that's when they then agreed to the willing buyer, willing seller. And one of the things that they also agreed to is that there were properties that the governments had signed, or companies had signed under what is known as BIPA, where they are protected by the government. And the property rights of these properties would not, even under any program to get land, they would not get, it would not be taken. So it was an unfortunate kind of an arrangement, but it was only going to subsist for 10 years. If the whites had, like they did not comply, they did not take heed of the willing buyer, willing seller. So after 1990, after 1989, we were supposed to have gone all out to repossess our land.